Thank you kindly. My name is Steve Foster. I have been an attorney for 25 years, and I am very appreciative of this opportunity that myself and Nikki Green and you, Kevin, along with Travis and others that will join us possibly periodically through this, have come together because we have taken interest in all the citizens in our society, given the reaction and the understanding of social injustice and the need to improve on our communities and society as a whole as citizens of the United States and the great state of Texas. You and I, Kevin, have had a longstanding relationship that goes back to last century and last millennium in the legislature. And so I want to highlight that this is a longstanding relationship, that not only did I work with you in the Texas legislature as committee director and general counsel of the Senate Committee on Criminal Justice, you were gracious enough in your organization, the Texas Municipal Police Association, has also allowed me to work with and for you as an attorney to serve your members. With that said, you and I had an opportunity to speak and recognize that together we could certainly move things forward, make improvements, and not be adversarial as Texans or citizens of the United States, not as black and white, pinned against each other, but looking for solutions that help all, not just black and white in our society. So good morning, Doug. I know he's coming in from Houston. And so with that, we have worked quietly, but tirelessly to create a foundation to get to this point where law enforcement agencies, a great organization of the state bar, our African-American lawyers section, and our legislative section committee headed by, and I will let Ms. Green say her credentials as well as the other persons on this call, but we needed to come together, recognize that there are some things that need to be changed that will help us not believe that it's us against them. We don't like the blue, we don't like the black, but black and blue in this situation is actually going to be a good thing. So we decided now we're at a point where we have assessed and looked at issues that we need to bring forth in a way that we also let the public know that we are working as organizations together for improvement.
Well, I appreciate that. Nikki, would you like to? I think this was the first time we've met Nikki, isn't it?
It is. And so it's nice to meet all of you guys, joining all the men on here. Being one of the solo women, but I am Nikki Chrisman Green. I am an attorney here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I have worked with Steve on the African-American lawyer section of the State Bar of Texas now for the last 2.5 years. And we have, especially in light, like he said, of the George Floyd situation, really, it's time that we really start to dig and analyze what are some things that we can improve and start working on. And so the African-American lawyer section this year with the upcoming legislative session has created a very robust legislative plan that we intend to introduce. And so what a great opportunity to be able to talk this through, professionals, those that are involved in that area. And like Steve said, come together and just kind of get a consensus so that we can all work together in improving these relations in the state of Texas, and not just in the state of Texas, really, but nationwide. We've seen a great outcry for a lot of reform, and we need to start here in our own backyard. I have been working in Fort Worth with community leaders and other attorneys on seeing some changes within the Fort Worth Police Department and in and of itself. And so this is a great opportunity to just have a very candid and real discussion on some change that we need to see, and just see how we can reach a consensus and try to get there and all working together rather than working against one another. So I'm happy to be a part, and I look forward to continued discussions.
Kevin, as you know, council member from Pflugerville, Texas, Rudy Mateer, who's our current chair of our State Bar of Texas section, is also joining us. It's great to see him. He's been along, so he's like my little brother. We've known each other forever. And it's great that you can come together. You know, the best business call is a personal call. And that's the one I made to you, Kevin, and also with Rudy. And it's been great to work with Nikki, Travis, and Doug as well. Rudy.
So my apologies, everyone. Busy morning, long session last night. But I want to reiterate what Steven just said. I think it makes a big difference when you're able to have these personal conversations, to have candid conversations about issues and concerns that are affecting not just the Black community, but what affects the Black community affects all communities in general. And the work that Nikki has been putting on this and putting fire to it, and the information, the impact with that for our, the African Minority section of the State Bar of Texas, has made a tremendous difference. Kevin, I've loved having our conversations already. Your candidness, your ability to speak on a variety of different issues and bring different viewpoint and ideas to things that, frankly, we may not necessarily be aware of yet. We all agree there are going to be things that we all wholeheartedly agree with. There are going to be some things that we're going to disagree with, but at minimum, and the necessity for conversations like this is to see what we can do building together, because all of us want to have a better re-envision of what law enforcement does in working with and serving their community. And that's something that we all can agree on.
All right, Travis.
My name is Travis Hammond. I'm the first vice president of TMPA, and I am a patrol sergeant for the city of Irving as well. Working, on the streets with this every day, we're all for positive change. If there's areas where we need to make change and move forward, we're all for that. As long as it's positive change, we're not trying to go backwards on things. There's areas we see every day, just in our own profession and the people that I work with, where we can definitely do that. And I think this is the first step in getting.
All right, Doug.
Yeah, Doug Griffith. I'm the vice president of the Houston Police Officers Union. Been with the Houston Police Department for soon to be 30 years. I spent most of my time as a gang or a tactical operations officer, which means we just go chase bad guys. I've had a really blessed career. Never expected myself to be in this position over at the union, but now that I'm here, I want to do everything I can to make sure that our future officers have what they need, the tools that they need in their toolbox to do the best job they can. And I think probably 90% of the things that we have that we want to talk about here all boil down to training. I mean, we need to train better. We need to have better resources. And I think that produces a better officer. I look forward to everyone's ideas, and hopefully we can come to some good conclusions.
And so that we don't leave anybody out. And by the way, I know everybody can see TMPA, and this is on the TMPA Facebook page, but Houston Police Officers Union is not part of TMPA, but they are our partner. So is the Dallas Police Association. Same thing is true there. Frederick Frazier is going to try and join us as often as he can on these things, but he's like everybody else. He's got a job. He's part of a task force, and he's out chasing crooks and everything. But we've also had folks from the Harris County Deputies Organization involved in these conversations, the DPS Officers Association. So it won't be uncommon. I know we've also had a couple of other members of the committee or section, I apologize, RJ and Abby. So we'll look forward to them, joining us as we move forward. But I thought it was important to understand that from a law enforcement perspective, this isn't just TMPA. This is, the one thing we do all have in common is we're all part of the Fraternal Order of Police now. And so between Houston, Dallas, Harris County, DPS, TMPA, we speak on behalf of something north of 50,000 law enforcement officers across the state of Texas. And I will tell you, from our perspective, we are always in favor of more and better training. We are always in favor of trying to improve the level of service that our officers can deliver to the citizens of Texas. We are opposed to any knee-jerk reactions that are based on rhetoric or hyperbole or just false information altogether, which is why we thought it was very important that we be able to have conversations like this one, and why when Steve called me back in, I guess it was I don't know, early June, we started having these conversations. We think it's important that people see that it is possible for folks who have different perspectives, who bring different points of view to this conversation, can do so professionally, responsibly, and without screaming at one another and calling each other names. Like you said, we're going to agree on stuff. So here's my argument. Whatever we think of what happened in Minneapolis, whatever we think of what happened in Baltimore or Atlanta or Ferguson, I think we can all agree on this. None of us want any of that to happen in Irving or Houston or Austin or anywhere else in Texas. So whatever we can do at the state and local level to prevent those things from happening, let's do it. Let's figure it out. So toward that end, Steve, we had talked about going through some of the proposed reforms, let's call them that. And
Yes.
What did you decide was going to be our first topic of discussion?
So everyone knows, lawyers at least, and I'm going to say, I don't know, it's not a stretch, that law enforcement, none of us like surprises. So we sat down and selected a couple of topics for today that we can work through. And I think our chair of the legislative committee of our section, Nikki, and Nikki, you and I and Rudy spoke about it. So I want to defer to the chair and let her roll out the two issues that we're going to put forth today.
Okay. And Kevin, I just want to not to undermine, but just in candid discussion and just to make sure we, are cognizant of those people that are listening. I agree with you that we don't want any of those incidents that happened in Minneapolis or in Missouri or Atlanta or in any other places to happen. But unfortunately, we have seen that happen here in Texas already, in Fort Worth especially, Dallas with Botham Jean, and in Fort Worth with Tatiana Jefferson. So unfortunately, it is in our backyard. And so I just want to make sure that we are acknowledging Sandra Bland, those that we have lost that are actually here in Texas, because we have seen some of those instances here in Texas. While it may have not been as egregious as the George Floyd, because I think that's the one that just made everybody say, wow, right? This is just, everybody can agree that this is not right, but we don't want to overlook those instances that have happened in Texas, because we've had quite a few. And so with that being said, the two platforms that we want to start with are, one, we want to discuss a statewide police clearinghouse that will identify prior instances of police misconduct as one topic today. And we'll start there. And then the second one is going to be preventing or revising the ability for when an employer or an officer is terminated as a result of being found guilty of police misconduct, from being able to transfer to another police department within the state in that same role. So those are the two topics that we want to focus on first. Going back to the first one, one of the things that we had looked at when we were coming up with a legislative proposal, and one that we feel would be very helpful and is actually supported on a national platform, as President Trump himself came up with discussed in his executive order, the establishment of a national clearinghouse where you can house police misconduct information, and not just misconduct, but complaints and other data that would assist not only in identifying those troubled officers, but also areas. It would create an opportunity for data to be created that would allow police departments to kind of look at, where are we seeing a lot of misconduct happening? Is it with police officers that have less than 5 years of training, less than 3 years of training? Is it happening in certain areas or certain neighborhoods? Are some cities being affected more than other cities? Is it happening in rural counties? And so it not only serves as a clearinghouse for citizens to feel that police officers or police departments are being transparent, and also providing that information without having to go through public information requests. Because I will concede that some of this information is available through the Public Information Act in Texas, and that Texas does have certain rules in place that would allow for citizens to receive information about officers that have committed, acts of misconduct or criminal things. But there is a layer of protection there. And so not everything goes in there. It takes a while sometimes for you to receive that public information. Chapter 143 has rules that will prevent certain information from being able to be used. And so when you look at that as a whole, we believe that it's really important to start to rebuild trust with the citizens of the state of Texas and police departments and just law enforcement as a whole, to make sure that we're holding them accountable by having this database and having a standard threshold in this database or clearinghouse where that information would be housed, and just tracking it per jurisdiction, like I said, rural versus some of the cities, and also determining what records we can maybe put in there from an internal affairs investigation, prosecutorial cases, anything, because sometimes that information, if they're not charged criminally, you won't see a lot of this stuff. And so I just wanted to put that out there and open that floor up to discussion on what you're currently doing that would be very close to that, and what are the stumbling blocks or what would prevent that database from being created.
Okay, Doug, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I don't think there's much of an issue as far as the database. I mean, let's just be honest. Most of the DAs now in Harris County, well, I know Harris County for sure, but most counties keep what they call a Brady list. And that's officers that have been in trouble, disciplined for whatever reason, and they're put on this list to be vetted when they give testimony. I don't foresee there being any issue with a statewide database that has sustained discipline. My issue, the only thing I would take issue with is that when you have discipline that is exonerated, unfounded, in no way proven, being listed. I have no problem with, I've got 4 written reprimands under my belt, 2 for missing court, 2 for accidents. I got no problem with that being public record, none at all. And I have no problem with any officers sustained discipline being public record. I don't think you're going to have any organization that has a problem with that.
I would say, is it something, Kevin and Doug and Travis, like a public TCIC of some sort? And I may be making a farther reach because I don't have all the requisites that go into that TCIC or NCIC, but something of that type of database that could have the certain things that Doug is talking about, Kevin or Travis, something to that effect.
I will point out TCIC, NCIC are only available to law enforcement agencies.
Right. I'm just talking about the creation of how that would look as the statewide database.
And if you don't mind, if you can indulge the audience, could you elaborate more on TCIC and those databases, please?
Texas Crime Information
Good call.
National Crime Information Center. They are the programs, the databases for criminal records that law enforcement in Texas can access, and nationwide. At the national level, it's maintained by the FBI. In the state of Texas, it's maintained by DPS. So that's what those are about. But you're not talking about putting the information in there. You're talking about a database, something like that.
It parallels that, correct? Something to that effect.
I think we would say, listen, if you're going to have such a database, actually, there's one that already sort of exists, and it's with the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement, TCOL, and that's where it would have to be housed. Right. Our concern, our primary concern, like Doug said, what about the stuff that's unfounded? Because as being in law enforcement over 40 years now, I will tell you the vast majority of complaints against our law enforcement officers are in fact unfounded. Let's face it, nobody likes getting a ticket. Nobody likes being told they've done something wrong. People complain about cops all the time. Some of it is warranted, a lot of it is not. So we have to have some way of, cleaning that out. The problem we have is that, in Houston, there is due process. There is a process by which complaints are investigated, thoroughly vetted, and then, go through whatever that disciplinary process is. Fully 40% of the cops in this state have zero due process when it comes to complaints that have been filed against them. They live in completely at-will environments. And so we would have to have some way of vetting that information before it goes in that database. So we're going to have some trouble overcoming that. Doug talks about his experience. I got 4 reprimands and 2 suspensions in my career in law enforcement. All of them happened in the first year, and they were all for being late for work. Turns out, as a 21-year-old kid, I had trouble making it to shift change at 5:45 every morning. And then where I started out in Baytown, if you were late once, you got a reprimand. In a 3-month tour of duty on day shift, late once, you got a reprimand. Late twice, you got a day off without pay, a suspension. Does it bother me if that's public record? Not a bit. But then I also had, some sort of due process to go through there. If the complaint was filed, I don't know, by somebody that I got sued one time for arresting a guy for murder. He claimed that I damaged his reputation by arresting him. Obviously, his attorney was using that lawsuit as a type of discovery. And then as the grand jury indicted the case, the lawsuit went away. But, how would we put that in? If somebody files a complaint against me for that, how do we put that in this database? So the devil's always in the details. Again, we have always, and I think Travis works for a city that's covered by Chapter 143. All disciplinary processes under 143 are open to the public. Everybody's welcome to come sit through the Civil Service Committee hearings, the arbitration hearings, and we encourage it. We have always encouraged. We would much rather have a hearing in front of 3 citizens in the city of Pflugerville, listening to everything that happened and making a determination than we'd rather have that than having a private secret meeting in the city manager's office.
Yep.
Yes, under Chapter 143, any disciplinary action that gets appealed goes through a civil judge, and it's all public record and it's open to public. I've sat in several appeal hearings that had nothing to do with me. I would just simply sit there to watch and see what was going on, and no one bats an eye at it. They welcome the people to come in and watch. But in reference to the database, we would definitely have to ensure that the complaints are sustained complaints and that they've had some sort of appeal process to ensure that it wasn't some false thing that's been garnered against the officer just because someone was upset at them.
Well, I think that vetting process absolutely would need to be necessary. I like the fact, though, that we can see a willingness, though, to collect information. I recognize it's open to the public and so on and so forth. But as you mentioned with Fred, people have jobs and they may not be able to attend. However, if they know they can go somewhere, type in and see what's happening or what's happened prior, it can give them, I think, some perspective on the fact that the officers know that this will be made public. And it's not just out there and you can go gather it, but it has been, it's like sunlight. If you take the magnifying glass, there's sunlight everywhere. But when you acutely put it on a focus, it has a whole different effect in that same sunlight because of the implementation of a magnifying glass. You can actually create heat and fire with that same sunlight. So I agree that we would need to focus it down, but I think it would be highly effective given we could find that magnifying glass that would put sustained incidents in one place for the general public.
Kevin,
Sorry, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, I'm going to jump in. And one more thing too, I completely respect the due process. Being an attorney, you always want to make sure that people are given the opportunity through claim, through hearing and appeal and everything before. And I think that there is a room or there's an opportunity, even if, let's say, an allegation or something is put into complaint, to put what the finding was. It was unfounded. I think that's the first part. One of the concerns that frequently comes up, and just in my discussions with people in the community, is the outcome of these investigations, sometimes how they are investigated. And of course, like you said, very seldom is a police officer found to be guilty. That doesn't necessarily mean that misconduct didn't happen. Doesn't necessarily mean that, they weren't disciplined or that there wasn't some kind of concern, which is why I think the data serves more than just for the public's consumption, but also for, if someone keeps being brought up on the same type of incident, right? It allows you to see trends. It allows you to be able to take that data and to say, is there a problem here, or is there an issue with our training? And so, and there's also room, like, Stephen said, and as everybody has expressed, to kind of label the data that is and determine a threshold of what data needs to go in there. And I think that while an internal affairs investigation or an internal investigation by the police department, the sergeant may not find wrongdoing, if there is a civilian oversight board, and let's say they come to a different conclusion, I think that's valuable information to put into a database. So when we're talking about the data that goes in there, I think there's room to kind of review and agree on a threshold requirement. Some counties may feel more comfortable, or some jurisdictions may feel more comfortable putting more in than others. But I think this establishing that threshold is really going to be key.
And I was going to follow up with Kevin. You made an interesting point. You said that 40% of all law enforcement officials in the state of Texas they're at will, and you're juxtaposing that to the due process system in there. Can you elaborate more on what occurs with those officers at will, and is there a due process in place? How are those officers treated? Are they treated in a different fashion? Are there any issues or concerns that you see the juxtaposition between that and the official due process that happens in different agencies? And are those smaller departments or bigger departments? Does it happen that?
We see it all the time. Most of the bigger departments have some sort of due process that they've enacted. They've either adopted Chapter 143, which, by the way, is adopted by the voters at the local level, or they have some sort of a city charter provision, or in counties, there's a separate chapter, Chapter 158, that covers county civil service for either all county employees or just for the sheriff's office. So there's different processes out there that are available. But an at-will agency means that the department head can terminate somebody for no reason whatsoever, as long as it's not an illegal reason. And most folks, when they hear that illegal reason, they think wrongful termination. Well, the lawyers in the room here can tell us there's no such thing in Texas as a statute, a catch-all wrongful termination. It would have to be that you actually violated the workers' compensation statute, or the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the whistleblower statute, or something along those lines. Other than that, if Travis is the constable of Denton County Precinct 3, and he has 27 deputies working for him, he can fire any one of them at any given moment, and they have zero recourse whatsoever. And it could be because they failed to back him in the last election, or because they arrested his nephew for possession of marijuana, or whatever. And the officer has zero recourse. So whatever Travis puts on the F5 now becomes gospel. And that's what we're concerned about. You know, as a guy who during my career, I had two separate incidents working at two different agencies that I think bring light to this. One was I arrested a city council member for DWI. You know what? I was in a civil service agency at the time. I never heard another word about it. I had another case where I stopped my own supervisor, who was drunk, almost hit me head on. He was off duty in his personal vehicle, and I reported that up my chain of command. And within a month, I had to find another job because I was no longer welcome in that agency after I had to testify against a fellow officer or something like that. So that agency did not have any kind of due process provision. So that's what we're talking about. And again, when we talk about due process, we're not talking about, you know, the criminal standard of proof beyond a, you know, reasonable doubt. We're talking about a preponderance of the evidence. We're simply talking about a fair shake. And it's not so much that the officers need it as our citizens need. Our citizens need to know that their police officers are going to be allowed to go out and do their jobs fairly and equitably without political repercussions, without the cronyism that led to the creation of civil service those many years ago to start with. I was recently reading a book called Houston Blue that traces the history of the Houston Police Department. And when I got up to the section that dealt with the 1930s and 1940s and how the mayors were using that police department to basically use it as a weapon, as a bludgeon against their political enemies, it was amazing the stories that are in there. It's just incredible.
We use that with the cadets right now when we talk about it, about corruption, and how, because they didn't have civil service, it allowed them to just promote, demote, you know, God, one day it's the mayor's driver, the next day he's the assistant chief of police. You just can't have that kind of thing.
You know, the reason why, I didn't mean to interrupt, Kevin. Go ahead. The reason why I was
I'm answering your question.
Well, I was going to follow up is that the reason why I was thinking about that is that one of the things that we've discussed and we've heard from law enforcement over and over again is that we all agree we want to get rid of bad officers and bad cops and make sure that, they're dispersed from there. But we've also heard that the process to do so has been, in a lot of ways abused by people and inhibits folks to be able to get rid of those bad officers. So I mean, it's not a discussion for here, but probably a discussion we'll have later on the line. But I'd like to know the juxtaposition between what's happening where you have somebody, just like you said, without due process, just, at will officers as compared to someone who's having due process and those officers. And are we able to have a better outcome either way with getting rid of bad officers? Have we even studied those lines to see what's occurring between that with those things? But that's not for here or there, but that's just something that percolated whenever discussed right here.
Well,
And also this is, I'm sorry, Kevin, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
What I was going to say is you and both Douglas and Travis brought up some good points on citizens being able to actually kind of participate in some of these proceedings. And I want to know is that information posted in a way that is accessible to the citizens so that they know when a hearing is happening? How can they get that information? Because I agree with you. I think that would be great for citizens to start sitting in on some of these proceedings and really get an idea of what's going on and be able to kind of analyze for themselves. I think that would help with an understanding of both roles and also with some transparency and accountability if we were able to do that. So can either one of you elaborate or direct us on where we could get that information so that we can let people know that this is an option?
Well, I think
all civil service hearings, at least for us, are posted at City Hall. They have a public bulletin board where they post that information for every civil service hearing. Some of them are just your mundane cleaning up language. They might not really have anything to do, but others will be in reference to maybe an officer's appeal or a firefighter's appeal, and for some type of discipline. But it's always definitely posted at City Hall, and then it's generally posted around the other offices within the department, which you probably wouldn't have access to that, but definitely at City Hall.
Is there anything online? Because if you don't work downtown, or if you're not around your courthouse, you know what I'm saying? That you can at least go and say, like we can see the docket of the day for each different court, so on and so forth. And I certainly appreciate the fact, but for whatever reason, people can't get there. Is there something else, or should we create some type of mechanism of listing so that the general populace would know what, because we have the technology.
And Travis, the reason I was going to add on to that was that I wonder if it's a point where the law hasn't caught up with the technology and the reality, because there's definitely a lot of things that, just like you said, we post literally in newspapers, the local newspaper publication, and something else from there. And you're thinking to yourself, okay, why not put this on Facebook? Why can't you just tweet something out, something like that on it? And, I'm just thinking to myself, is this one of those things where it's like, oh yeah, we could do this, but the law hasn't caught up with what's actually, being done with that aspect.
I will say, I can't think of one civil service agency that doesn't currently post it on their website at the very least. And I don't know that any of us would be opposed to legislation that said it has to be, posted online or whatever. I'd be careful about naming the specific vehicle, because, we could have passed a law about 7 years ago that said it'll all go on MySpace and nobody would be able to see them anymore. So I wouldn't bother us one bit. Like I say, we have always been in favor of complete and total transparency. And here's why. And Rudy brought it up. Nobody hates a bad cop more than a good cop. Good cops, just bad cops make the jobs of the good cops that much more difficult.
And bad lawyers, good lawyers don't like them. I just want to know, we're right in lockstep with you. We don't need bad lawyers when you have good lawyers.
Well, we won't even get into the whole percentage thing. But we will argue that the vast majority of our police officers are good, decent, honest, hardworking people trying to do the right thing. And even when they get it wrong, the majority of the time it's because they made a mistake and not because they're bad people or bad cops. But there are bad cops, and we have never denied that. And we have tried harder than any other profession on earth to police our own, to make sure that we are transparent. not to say we can't do it better. And like you say, keep up with the times, keep up with the technology that's available to us. And I just cut you off, Doug, and I apologize.
No, you're good. You're good. What I want to say is that most officers know when they screw up and they take their discipline. And that can be proven by the fact that we arbitrate less than 3% of our discipline cases, less than 3%. So, and out of that, we win about 70% of those. And there's a reason for that. If the department does a great job or a proper job of investigating the complaint, and the chief does the proper discipline, there's no need for arbitration. And that's just the cold hard facts of it. Our people do it right 90% of the time. The other 8 or 9% is a simple mistake that anybody would have made, because it's a human, still you're human on this job. And that 2% that don't need to be here.
That's an excellent point. And it's one of those things that I think we do a horrible job of letting our citizens know. The vast majority of citizens have no idea that 97% of Houston police officers who get disciplined don't even fight it, don't even argue about it, because they know they deserved it. And those 2 suspensions I got never dawned on me, never crossed my mind to appeal them. I knew I was guilty. I took my punishment and I tried to learn how to wake up a little earlier, when I came back around to day shift. But most people don't know that. And I think that's the other thing we have to talk about here. It's not just a matter of improving processes. It's a matter of improving communications too. We need to do a better job of encouraging our law enforcement officers to get to know the citizens they serve on a personal, non-enforcement basis. We've got to do a better job of getting to know folks, when we're not writing them a ticket, putting them in jail, taking a report because their house has been burglarized or their kid ran away from home, or what. Even when we meet the best of people, we meet them at the worst of times, and we need to change that culture somehow.
No, that was exactly one of the things that I wanted to say. The other thing, for time, I know we spoke about 2 topics. It's about 9:40. Do we want to? And again, we can have more of these. And if it's just a one topic thing, I don't want to, inhibit what we are talking about on this topic of the statewide database. However, I just know that we had mentioned 2 topics. If we table one and we do this, of course, as we're going to continue, but I just wanted to see Nikki and Kevin, what y'all wanted to do.
Actually, I think they go hand in hand. I think these 2 topics
I agree. And so
Okay.
just to add, and that's what we can add that as the additional layer, that next question. And that bridges kind of what you were saying, Kevin. I completely agree with you. And I appreciate you acknowledging that the law enforcement needs to do a better job with communicating with the citizens that they are serving. I know that here in Fort Worth, one of the concerns that we've had is that you have police officers that are doing the policing in communities that they don't live in. And sometimes they're out of touch with the citizens that they're protecting. There is a large issue with the racial profiling and how some areas and some communities are targeted more than others. The way that the policing, you see these large police presence in certain communities just on the corners, where in others you don't. And sometimes that can be intimidating in and of itself. And so getting to know the officers getting to know the community on a level that's outside of, a police shooting or some kind of, like you said, incident or use of force unnecessary, I think is critical to improving that relationship and trust. And I think as we continue to have these meetings or discussions, maybe coming up with some activities or even some suggestions on how police can do that, because I think that's going to be key in regaining trust and, just like you said, building up those relationships in these communities where it's broken. That's a great bridge to use. And one of the leading to our next concern when we're talking about this, the misconduct in the database, one of the things that we also have to look at is there's a concern here where you have police officers that may be terminated because of misconduct. Maybe they don't make it to a criminal level of investigation or internal affairs, but they're let go by the police department. And then they are able to just go to a different police department with that misconduct record or with some concerns on what they did to be terminated. And they just are able to go to another jurisdiction or another area to do that same job. And so now that problem in Fort Worth has now went to the problem in El Paso, right? And so how does the police, what things are in place already to protect citizens of the communities from police officers just jumping from one jurisdiction to another when they have been terminated due to misconduct, or they do have those records? What protections are in place for that?
And along with that, because I recall you saying, if you're at will and you have a situation, how can we differentiate between, you arrested your supervisor and then they just said, okay, Mr. Lawrence, thank you, but no thanks, and you're off? There needs to be something that distinguishes that type of scenario. You didn't do anything wrong, but you were terminated or in an at-will situation where we don't need you anymore, versus exactly what Nikki's describing.
Well, okay, let's first talk about where we are. What's
Sure.
the situation? And Steve, I think you were actually still working in the Senate in the early 2000s when we helped pass what we at the time called the Gypsy Cop Bill. And it was basically a change to the F5, which is the separation report that an agency has to file. When a police officer is hired by an agency, the agency has to send an L1 form to TCO, to the Commission on Law Enforcement, saying, hey, we've hired this person and here's the information. And then when they leave, you have to file an F5. And up until the early 2000s, the department head, the chief, the sheriff, the constable could pretty much put anything they wanted to on the F5, and there was no accountability. And so we saw officers, getting in trouble for any number of things, and then that information not being passed on to the next agency. So what the bill did, and I think it was 2003 when we initially pushed this through, it said when an officer leaves a department, the department head has to, on the F5, has to classify it as either an honorable discharge, a general discharge, or a dishonorable discharge, and then has to give some detail what happens. And the key to it was it required the department head to tell the truth for the first time on that form, so that the next time that officer applied somewhere else, the department could get a copy of that. Now, there is a process by which an officer can appeal that, and it goes to the State Office of Administrative,
SOA?
the
SOA.
Yeah, the SOA hearings. Yeah.
Yes.
And it's been tweaked a few times since then, and there's still some room for improvement, but that's the process that is currently in place. There are still some difficulties with it, but there is, and Travis or Doug may have to help me out with this. At one time, I believe there was a rule that said if an officer received 2 dishonorable discharges, they automatically lost their license, their peace officer's license. Is that still the case?
I don't remember.
I'd have to go back and double check that, to be honest. It happens so infrequently that I really can't tell you if that is still the standard that's out there. Certainly at that time, we were in favor of that type of a standard. We are perfectly okay if there has been, in fact, some due process, some fundamental fairness in the process, and the officer has had 2 bites at the apple. Okay, maybe they just, the fact is not everybody's cut out to be a cop. It just takes a different type of individual to do this job. Not better, not worse, just different. And not everybody's cut out for it, just like not everybody's cut out to be a lawyer.
Hey, I can tell you this. I know I have, and I'm almost 100% sure Kevin has, probably Travis too. We've had to set people across from our desk and tell them, this isn't the job for you. You really need to think about something else, because you don't want to see them get hurt or hurt anybody else.
Doug, can you elaborate more on that? So that's interesting you brought that up, and Kevin said that before in passing with it, but what have you seen? What instances, what action have you seen where you yourself in your position of capacity have said, you're a nice guy, nice woman, but this isn't the job for you?
Usually for me, it's something to deal with safety, where they have put themselves in a bad position or other officers in a bad position that can get somebody hurt. Last thing I want to do is have an officer here that's scared, that's afraid, because that's where people make mistakes. If you're scared on a scene, then you've got a greater chance of going overboard and hurting a citizen or getting another officer hurt. So it's better not to have those individuals in this kind of job. I mean, don't get me wrong. We all get scared from time to time. That's a human emotion. I get that. But you also got to learn to control that. And
Well,
guys that can't.
that's one thing that I would point out as a Black male. It seems that there is a lot of apprehension. I don't, want to bring the phraseology, either the public enemy number one, the menace to society. When you see me in that fashion, you've already put yourself at least in almost a slippery slope situation that says, oh, Black guy, 6 feet, 220, I could have real issue. I'm like, you have an Ivy League attorney here. If you give me an opportunity to let you know my bar card number, which I have memorized, we can diffuse a lot of things here. But at 9, 10, 11 at night, and those are the things where relationships, I don't see every adult white male as being in a supremacy group or somebody that's looking to get me off one-on-one. I have enough relations and interactions. It's surprising that a lot of the majority don't have relationships with the minority. And so the formulation of who that person is can make all the difference in the world, whether you're trained or not, because you know not, and you don't act from a position of what you understand if you don't.
And I think that's where the unconscious bias, the preconceived ideas, and that's where it all flows. And so it goes into the training. And Doug, it's great that you are in one of those officers or one of those leaders that will recognize that and stop that at the head. And I think if we had more people that were willing to do that and that were honest with the ones that are working underneath them, we could really have some improvement here and some reform that would really make lasting change and not temporary.
I think this is another one of those things that the general public doesn't understand about law enforcement. The number of people that apply to be police officers versus the number that actually get out there on the streets is extremely small. I can use my own hiring test as an example. When I first got hired, I think there were 700 people that showed up to take the civil service exam that night. Less than 150 of us passed it, and 3 of us got hired. And only 2 of those wound up getting out of training and onto the streets. It's incredibly small, the percentage of people. So what Doug is talking about is somebody that's actually gotten to the point, and we still weed them out because they just, it becomes obvious they're not going to make it, which is why, by the way, civil service has a 1 year or 18-month period to evaluate people, and during which they can be dismissed just simply for failing probation.
Mm-hmm.
Because
so if they fail probation in with your department, are they able to then try to process again somewhere else?
You can try, and this is, by the way, this gets right back to the heart of this second question. We believe that one of the keys to this is every agency, and by the way, Texas has exponentially higher percentage of law agencies than other states of similar sizes. We can make that a conversation for later on. But every agency should be required, mandated, to do a full and thorough background investigation anytime they're going to commission somebody as a peace officer from top to bottom. If they're going to hire somebody to be the chief in Hallettsville or be the chief in Irving or be the chief in Dallas, they should all go through the same thorough vetting process as somebody that's going to be hired to be a patrolman in Pflugerville or Houston.
Nikki, to answer your question in reference to the probation, whether you're at a civil service city or not, while you're on probation, you can be let go for essentially no cause. Generally there's just cause there, but there's no appeals process to be let go if you're on probation.
Travis, to Kevin's point, and actually that was really good information. I appreciate you clarifying that. Is there a way to make a baseline, background check standard for all law enforcement, or is it depend on the resources of each municipality, locality? Because I know part of it is, let's be honest, it's the money involved, right?
Yeah.
It's money involved with that. But at the same time, for something this important and so vital, as all three of you have said right here, and the public trust that goes with it. Is there a way you see that, hey, listen, there's this one system that works extremely well in vetting who we're actually putting, these men and women in the uniforms who are there to protect us, as opposed to something where it may not necessarily be working?
Is it, yes. Is it probable? Not as we currently sit, because let's face it, the city of Houston has exponentially more resources to put towards something like this than the city of Granger does. It's, if we're going to adopt those standards, we have to overcome the opposition that you're going to hear from your political subdivisions.
Is there any way that we can, in the situation where you don't have the population, that you can create regions, like you do a regional high school where you have 3 or 4, towns or cities, acting in a way that would allow for them to collaborate and get that done, as opposed to, Houston versus Dallas versus Austin or something like that.
Above all of our pay grades, but I will say this: it has been done successfully in other states. It's been discussed.
And I was going to say, even if you don't do the regions, even dividing it up and setting a threshold based on the size of the county or the municipality. And so everyone that's with this number of people or this size would have to, abide by this. The chapter 143 has sections where they divide it up by the size. And so I think that would be definitely something to look at adopting, and that could help with the issue of like you said, doing that through a background check and having that information would help, I think, with respect to having that police officer's file and just that transparency.
Now, I will give you this. We have a certain constable in our area that loves to poach guys that are fired from us because he goes, they're the best employees I've ever had. So if you get fired here and it's something that he believes is not criminal, he will take them, and they're great policemen for it. So that's the kind of issue you're looking at. He's already been trained. He's went through he's done, let's say, 5-6 years with the Houston Police Department. He knows what he's doing. He's a good officer, but gets in the switch and gets fired. They pick him up.
Well, I tell you, Doug, it's kind of like the old Oakland Raiders. They would take guys that were cast off and they weren't seen, they were kind of bad guys, for their other teams, and they'd come to the Raiders and all of a sudden they're in the AFC Championship, and they weren't bad. It was just that was a better.
There's some policy that the chief had, that was his little pet peeve. They get fired here for that, and then boom, there you go. So, we have to go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Doug. Finish your thought.
I'm just saying we have to look at this, because some of these agencies are not going to care, because during the background check they find out, okay, he was fired because he didn't do the proper felony stop. When this chief says you will do every felony stop the same, does that mean he's a bad cop? No, it means he violated their policy. So he goes somewhere else and has a great career. We have to also be cognizant of that, because that can happen as well.
But we also have to be willing to balance that against those that are the cops that may have may be very smart, may be good in the area of being a cop, but also are likely to bend the rules, that are also likely to not follow the use of force policy, that are also likely to be out here violating the racial profiling rules. And so you have to also balance that, because that's where we run into the issues. You might be a good cop, but there are still rules that need to be followed. I'm a good attorney, but there are certain things that I need to do. Yeah, we all bend the rules sometimes, but if you're bending the rules to the point to where you don't care that the rules even exist and you're not willing to abide by those, then that becomes a problem. Right. And so while you said that constable doesn't care, he probably should care in some instances, because some of these officers, while they might be good officers on paper or good officers based on what is deemed a good officer, they may not be a good officer with dealing with the community. They may not be a good officer with following stated policies that you have that would prevent unnecessary use of force or a deadly injury that could happen to a citizen. So that's where our concerns come. And I think we have to find a way to balance those concerns.
And along those lines, what you're saying, Nikki, Doug, what I was going to say is that I can understand the analogy that Steve used regarding the Oakland Raiders, and hey, listen, okay, it didn't work out here, but it'll work out something else with that. But to the public, particularly at this time, in this moment right here, hearing that, I could see that as well as just as nervous. Say, hey, wait a minute, so you were fired here, but you got picked up here fairly quickly. What's going on here? Because let's be frank, because they aren't able to usually sit in those civil service hearings, as Travis was bringing up right there. They don't have access to a specific database where they're cognizant saying, oh, well, okay, Rudy did this. Okay, so he may have gotten fired, but it wasn't for, abusing, assaulting a citizen or, racial profiling or something like that as well. And that lack of coordination of information to people, that's key, because you can understand if somebody has been, as Kevin put it, they're consistently late to work at 5:45 in the morning, 21 years old, and they go ahead and get fired to get removed from someone else. But you juxtapose that to someone who's, found on a regular basis to violate people's civil rights, and then all of a sudden, like, hey, wait a minute, how do they get, rehired over here? That's a huge difference. And that goes in the conversation part and honestly goes into knowing your officers. I know, for example, here in Pflugerville, one of the best things that officers do is that they have a program where they stop young boys and girls on their bikes on a regular basis during the summertime. Why do they stop those kids? They stop those kids to go ahead and give them free ice cream cone certificates, because those kids are wearing their helmets, they're observing the rules of the road, they're watching out for each other, and they're obeying the law, and they're having those positive interactions that are necessary and key, as opposed to those adversarial relationships with as well. So people become cognizant of, well, this is Officer Dan, this is what Officer Dan is doing right here. So Officer Dan stops, Rudy. Well, you know what? I know Officer Dan, so that Rudy would have done, or he wouldn't have been stopped with that. And it was interactions with that, because if you just hear yourself, well, Officer Dan got fired here in Pflugerville, but got picked up over in, McAllen, you're thinking to yourself, well, what's going on here? What's happened with that? And that's where going tying back to the first question, a central database, some sort of repository where people can do it, where people can actually sit and watch the civil service hearings, so that as well. That's going to build that trust, that understanding, and be able to do that juxtaposition between what officers, are officers that just make a mistake, and officers who are just, like you said, Doug, this isn't the profession for you.
Right. Hey, well, let me ask you a question, Rudy. Now that you're there in Pflugerville, how did y'all let Cody Irby get away from you guys over there at Pflugerville PD? I want to know that. That's a good kid right there.
And let me say this, y'all. We certainly, I think this is a great start. And, a lot of people may say it's not how you start, it's how you finish. I want both, because I know you can have a better 40 time when you have a great start and a great finish. But we do, and I did say, because as we said initially, we have jobs. If I could ask for a hard stop at 11 here at this point, I know our legislative chair has some things I do as well, and so do you. Y'all, can we? Yes, sir.
We've got some comments, some questions from people that are viewing.
Yes.
And if you give me 20 seconds, I think one of them talks about the F5. I think we've already covered that, the way that the F5 process currently works. Another one asked whether or not the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement has a set of standards about how agencies investigate complaints against officers, whether there's one set of best practices. And the answer is no, there is not one statewide standard being used, and that's something that may be worth looking into. The other one actually asked, we should have some type of training for citizens about how to deal with law enforcement officers. And I know we talked about this in one of our early conversations last session. Senator West and Senator Whitmire both sponsored legislation that did that. Unfortunately, it's only in the 9th grade curriculum in high school, and it's in the Texas Driver's License Handbook, which none of you have ever read, I promise you, because we don't either. So, but I will tell you this, Rudy brings it up. There's a lot of great ways of doing this. I asked a couple of assistant chiefs in Baytown recently about their Citizens Police Academy. Who attends a Citizens Police Academy? And the answer is, it's generally not the members of the minority communities. Okay. And then my follow-up question is, where do you hold them? Well, they're at the police station. And my answer is, why not have citizens police academies out in the community and in those neighborhoods, in where everybody has an equal opportunity to sit through that. I think the more people understand and get to see firsthand what cops do day in and day out, the better off we're all going to be.
Right.
But
And again, not having them at the police station, again, it's psychological. And so the thing is, if you're in the community and you recognize that you have positive meetings and you see positive things in the community, every time I see Doug, it's not just, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. It's, well, he comes here to do certain things with the community, not because he's just policing. Again, Nikki, I'm gonna let you close. You are the chair of our legislative committee, and I know that we want to stay on task.
So I just want to say that I think this was a very good discussion, and I look forward to more and working on a plan where we can start to maybe put some things into action. You've given me some things to think about with some of your comments, and hopefully I've been able to give you some things to think about with some of the concerns that I've raised, and I look forward to our next conversation. This has been very helpful.
Great. We'll get another one scheduled. I'll get in touch with everybody.
Excellent. Awesome. Thank
All
you guys. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you all. Y'all have a great
See
day.
y'all again.